Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm back with 4 more DIY farmhouse summer decor ideas that are all easy and really inexpensive to make. Most of the materials I use in today's video are from the Dollar Tree, and a few items are from a few different craft stores as well. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up and share it. Now let's get right into today's projects. The first DIY for today, I'll be making a welcome sign. For this project, I used this round sign from Dollar Tree. I'll be using the welcome word on this stencil that came from Joann Fabrics, black and white ribbon from Walmart, Waverly chalk paint and plaster and also in ink, folk art chalk paint and castle, paintbrushes, forsythia stems from Joann Fabrics, jute, and my hot glue gun. For this project, I started by cutting the original jute hanger off of the sign and then flipped it over because I'm going to be using the back of the sign as the front of my sign. I then peeled off the sales tag that was attached to the back and then used some sandpaper to sand off any sticky residue that the tag had left. Once I had a nice smooth surface, I then started painting my front of my sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color ink. And since the paint is so pigmented, I only had to do one coat. After the paint has completely dried, I then went in with my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle and a small paintbrush, and I dry brushed that color around all of the edges of my sign and then along the front as well. When I was dry brushing it on the front, I did stay going in the same directions, up and down. Next, I'm placing down this stencil right on top of my sign. I am only going to be using this welcome word on the stencil, and I'm placing it on the bottom of my sign right in the center, and the color that I'm using to fill it in is the Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I am using my Dollar Tree stencil brush to stencil this color on. I did have to go over the word twice with this paint color to get the color payoff that I wanted. Once that paint color all dried, I then peeled the stencil off. Now I'm going to be creating my bow to go on the top of my sign. I'm cutting 3 different size pieces of ribbon. This first long one I'm doing at 20 inches long. The second piece of ribbon that I'm cutting is at 15 inches long. And then the third piece of ribbon that I'm cutting is at 12 inches long. I'm now going to be making a circle out of each piece of ribbon. I'm placing hot glue on one end of the piece of ribbon and then bringing the other end of that same ribbon around and placing it on the glue to make a circle. I did do this for all 3 pieces of my ribbon. Next, I'm taking the largest circle that I created and placing it on the very bottom, the medium one on top of the large one, and then the small one on top of the medium one. So just stacking them all together. Then I'm taking a piece of jute, pinching them up in the middle and then tying that piece of jute around them in the middle to form the top part of my bow. I'm then fluffing up the ends of my bow so that it looks nice and full when I attach it to the very top of my sign. Next, I need to make the tail end of my bow, so I'm cutting a piece of this ribbon at 15 inches, then I'm taking a piece of jute and tying it around the very center portion of that piece of ribbon. I'm now putting a good amount of hot glue in the center of that piece of ribbon that I just created and then placing the bow that I created on top of the glue to attach everything together. I wanted my tail ends of my bow to have a V shape, so here I'm just cutting both ends of the bow into a V. To attach my bow, I'm placing hot glue in the top center portion of my sign and then placing the bow over top of the glue. I wanted to add some of these lamb's ears that I picked up from Walmart, so I'm just cutting them down a little bit so they aren't so bulky when I attach them around my bow. And then I'm just placing hot glue right onto the sign and then placing the lamb's ear stems on the glue to attach those as well. And I did want to add a little bit of color to this sign, so I'm taking some of these forsythia stems that I picked up from Joann Fabrics. I'm cutting them down a little bit just like I did the lamb's ear so that I can work them around my bow. And again, just using hot glue around the bow to attach the forsythia stems. For the last step, I'm adding a piece of jute back through that pre-drilled hole that was already in the sign, just tying it the length that I want it and then cutting off the ends. Here is my welcome sign all finished. I love how this one turned out, and a lot of the materials I used for this project were materials that I just had laying around in my stash. Now for DIY number 2, I'll be making a sweet summer sign. For this one, I used this mini Oh My Heart sign that I picked up from Walmart around Valentine's Day, wood beads, Waverly chalk paint and plaster, folk art acrylic paint in Old Ivy, folk art chalk paint in Imperial, paintbrushes, a Sharpie marker, Craftsmart wood stain in brown, alphabet stamps, watermelon stickers from Dollar Tree, jute, and my hot glue gun. I started by painting over the words that were on this sign. I still want it to be a white color, but I obviously needed to cover up those words, so I used my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and did a few coats to cover up the words that were on the sign. Once that was all dry, I then took my Craftsmart wood stain in an old towel and just wiped that stain over top. This is a water-based stain and I love it so much. I've used it in a lot of my videos recently. Once I had this all on the way I wanted to, I let it dry really good before then taking some more of that Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and a stencil brush, and I dry brushed that color over top of the stain color. I did need to have it a little bit lighter so that the stamps that I'm gonna apply will actually appear. Next, I'm painting 2 of these unfinished wood watermelons from Dollar Tree, and I'm using a really small brush when painting these. I'm doing the outside of the watermelons with that folk art acrylic paint in Old Ivy. Then for the red watermelon portion, I'm using the folk art chalk paint in the color Imperial and that small paintbrush once again. And then because I wanted to have the white color in between the red and the green portion of the watermelon, I again am using a really small paintbrush to do this, and I'm just painting as good of a line as I possibly can in between those 2 colors. Once that was all dry, I then took a Sharpie marker in the color black and I just colored in all of the watermelon seeds. Next, I'm stamping on my words, and the words that I'm using for this project are sweet in summer. The word sweet I'm stamping at the top left portion of the sign, and then the bottom right portion of the sign I'm doing the word summer. I did do all capital letters for this project, and I picked these stamps and my ink pad up from Micheals, and they were really inexpensive, and so far I've been loving them. Once I was done stamping on my words, I then attached my watermelons. I took the little sticker thing that was on the back right off, placed some hot glue on the back, and then pressed the watermelon down. And I did the watermelons going kind of like in a diagonal shape, and I did the same thing to the second watermelon. Now I'm stringing 2 of these wooden beads onto a piece of jute. I'm putting a 1 bead on one end of the jute and then the other bead at the other. And to hold the beads in place, I did 2 knots on each end of the piece of jute. Once I had them all placed exactly where I want them to be, I flipped over my sign and then just hot glued the ends of those pieces of jute down. Here is my mini sweet summer sign all finished. I ended up hanging mine on an outside hanger above one of my petunia plants, and I think it turned out so cute. Next is DIY number 3. I'll be making a home sweet home sign. For this one, I used this USA sign from Dollar Tree, wood stems from Dollar Tree, and also succulents from Dollar Tree, Waverly chalk paint and plaster and also in the color ink, folk art chalk paint and castle, paintbrushes, this home sweet home stencil from Micheals, reindeer moss and also Spanish moss, nautical rope, raffia, and my hot glue gun. I started by cutting off the jute hanger that was originally on the sign, and I've already taken the tag off of the back and sanded it down nice and smooth. I am going to be using the back side of the sign for the front of my sign once again. And then I did not want to have these holes in my sign, so I took some wood filler and then just filled those in. Once the wood filler dried completely, I then took a piece of my 120 grit sandpaper and sanded any of that extra wood filler off so that I had a nice smooth surface for painting. I then painted the surface with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster. I did have to do 2 coats of this paint to get everything covered up the way I wanted it to be. Once the color was dry, I then went in with an old chip brush and my castle colored paint, and I dry brushed that color along the front of my sign, and I did go in the same direction with my paint strokes up and down. Next, I'm laying out 5 of these wood stems from Dollar Tree, and I'm leaving a space in between each piece of wood. I'm then placing hot glue on the top portion of each stem and then placing a piece of jute over top of the glue to attach it. I did this going along the top of all 5 stems, and then I also did that same step, leaving a space in the middle, and I did this on the bottom portion of the wood stems as well. Next, I'm going to be attaching some of my reindeer and Spanish moss, and to do that, I'm placing hot glue right on top of my painted sign towards the bottom, then sticking that Spanish moss over top of the glue. Once I have the Spanish moss on, I then put hot glue right over top of the Spanish moss and then pressed on some of that reindeer moss. Both of these mosses are from Dollar Tree. Now I'm placing my wood stems over top of the moss. I'm seeing how long I need my jute pieces to be, and then I'm tying the 2 that were around the wood stems, the top and bottom. I'm tying those 2 pieces of jute together in a knot on each side, and then I'm just hot gluing those knots down and cutting off any excess jute. Next, I'm cutting the tags off of the 3 succulents that I'm going to be using from Dollar Tree. All 3 of these did have a little clip at the bottom, and I'm not going to be needing the clip, so I'm just pulling that right off of each succulent. It wasn't really hard to do, I just held on tight to the flower and pulled the clip right off. And then I'm going to be attaching all 3 of those succulents into the Spanish moss on my sign. I just placed the hot glue in the Spanish moss and then placed the succulent down onto the glue, and I held those into place until the glue was all dry. After I had all my succulents attached, I then placed on this Home Sweet Home stencil on the top of my sign above my succulents, and it is from Micheals. And then the color that I'm using on the stencil is the Waverly chalk paint in the color ink, and I'm using my Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. Once that paint was all dry, I then very carefully peeled off my stencil. I was going to leave my sign as is, but then decided I was going to use a raffia bow. So here I'm taking a piece of raffia, tying it into a really simple bow, and just forming the raffia until it was the size that I wanted it to be and the shape that I wanted it to be. Sometimes you have to work with the raffia a little bit. And then I hot glued that bow right above the words Home Sweet Home. The hanger for my sign, I'm going to be using a piece of nautical rope also from Dollar Tree. I just measured how long I wanted it to be going on the back of my sign, cut it down to size, and hot glued both ends of that nautical rope on the back side of my sign. Here is my Home Sweet Home sign all finished. It turned out exactly how I envisioned it, and almost all of the materials I used for this one are from Dollar Tree. For the last DIY today, I'm making a Be Kind sign. For this one, I used an unfinished wooden arrow from Dollar Tree, wooden letters from Hobby Lobby that spell out Be Kind, bee stencils from Micheals, Waverly chalk paint in plaster, ink, and also in the color maize, paintbrushes, and my hot glue gun. I first started by cutting off the jute hanger that was already originally attached to this piece of wood. I'm going to be using the piece of wood not like an arrow, but going upward like a house shape. I then painted it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color ink, and I did only do 1 coat of paint for this. I then painted all of my wood letters that spell out Be Kind with my chalk paint in the color plaster, and I only did 1 coat of paint for the letters as well. Once all of the paint was dry, I then started placing my letters in the center of my sign, and I wanted to have them right in place before I started gluing them down. I then took some hot glue, placed it on the back side of each letter, and then pressed it down where I originally already placed it. Next, I'm placing my bee stencils on. I'm using a larger bee and a smaller bee. I did get these both from Micheals. I placed the smaller bee on the bottom and the larger bee on top. For the paint color that I'm using to stencil over the bees, it is from Waverly and it is called Maize, and I used my Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the color. After the maize color dried, I then peeled off each bee stencil. And this is the Be Kind sign all finished. This one was so easy to do and took me no time at all. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it. If you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Be sure to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. And I would love to hear in the comments down below which project from today's video was your favorite and what upcoming videos you'd like to see from me. Thank you so much for watching.